Well, at least one common thread among many of these protests is a call for schools to divest from companies like to Israel or the war in Gaza. The specifics vary from college to college. Some students want to pull investments from weapons manufacturers. Others, like Columbia, go even further. Students there want the school to divest from Google, which has a large contract with the Israeli government. Universities have mostly refused to give in to these demands, and some experts say divestment would have a very limited impact. Witold Henisz is Vice Dean of the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He's also the faculty director of its Environmental, Social, and Governance Initiative, and he joins me now. Professor, thanks so much for taking the time. So, as we should note, the BDS movement has existed long before October 7th, going back many years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any single school that has gone on to divest from Israel, despite the pressure. Are you?
I'm really more of an expert on the historic success or efficacy of divestment, so I'd prefer to keep the comments there if we could.
Okay, fine. So to that point, as the introduction said to you, there are some experts that say that there is little to no impact from essentially divesting from these schools. Walk us through your research, and does that back up that point?
It does. I think we really have to think about divestment as a two-sided transaction. Someone's selling and someone's buying. So who are you selling to and who's buying? If you care deeply about an issue, and everyone who cares deeply about an issue, whether it be fossil fuels or a country you're trying to target, and you sell the shares to someone who cares less, what are you achieving? What's really happening? If the owners of a company are moving from people who care about a case or an issue to those who don't, in fact, the outcome can be at cross purposes to the goals of the divestment movement. And that's what we've frequently seen in a history of such movements.
So I know you want to stick to a very narrow point here, but as we're looking at these protests, and this issue specifically comes up surrounding Israel anytime we do see conflict or fighting intensify in the region, I'm just wondering, is this something that you hold classes about? Do you advise the heads of the school, the people who run the endowments on this issue? Because as our reporters have noted, there appears to be some negotiation going on with at least some of the heads of these schools and these students who are demanding that the schools divest.
Well, we actually do have a class that I teach looking at the divestment movement with a focus on fossil fuels. And when I start the class, often about 80 to 90% of the students are in favor of the University of Pennsylvania divesting from fossil fuels. And by the end, they've taken a more nuanced view. They really recognize the limits of that disengagement or removal of their voice over the direction of the fossil fuel companies. And they're in favor of speaking out about the direction of change, about the climate transition, but doing it through the active ownership of the shares through the university endowment, as opposed to selling them to someone who cares less.
Yeah, you note that financially it may not make a significant impact, if any, but that to show moral support or whatever the point they're trying to make does sometimes have an impact.
Well, I think it's important to separate those two items. So the first question is, does it work? Does it drive change? Does it drive down the stock price? Does it change corporate behavior? And the answer to that is no. The research, with the possible exception of the apartheid movement, but even there's a great deal of uncertainty and questioning. The stocks that were targeted in the anti-apartheid movement didn't actually underperform the market. The companies that divested experienced, actually when they divested, they experienced some stock market losses. So it doesn't seem to work in terms of the companies you're targeting. Then the question is, does it make you feel better? Does it make a moral position? Does it build some moral legitimacy for a course of action, or make continued continuity of a course of action illegitimate? I think we see some evidence that it can be part of a broader social movement. Should it be? If it doesn't have the effect we claim, if it doesn't actually drive change in the companies, why does it make us feel better? Why does it make us feel better to disassociate, to give up the right to influence these companies through share ownership? It's a puzzle, I think, that we need to wrestle through. It might make us feel good, but should it really? And I think we need to take the time to ask that question.
In terms of what this applies to, I know you mentioned certain sectors like oil and gas, and then obviously, famously, South Africa. Are there any other countries aside from Israel where your research can give us more insight into the cause and effect of BDS?
Well, there have been many divestment movements targeting weapons manufacturers, those associated with the Vietnam War, targeting, fossil fuels has been very prominent, the coal industry, others. So there's a wide range that we're drawing this research from and looking at a number of these campaigns and really seeing very little material impact on the companies affected. And again, a transfer of ownership from people who care about the issue to people who don't care. Think about the impact in fossil fuels. If everyone who cares about the climate transition sells and the Saudis, the Russians, and the oil manufacturers buy, what have we accomplished? What's the outcome of that? Is it really in furthering of the climate transition, or could it work at cross purposes? I think that's the issue we have to raise. And so whatever the issue is you care about, exhibit your voice. Use the voice you have as a share owner to try to influence change as a share owner, as a customer, as a supplier. Look at the channels you have. Don't disengage, which is essentially what the divestment movement is supporting.
Yeah, and perhaps take a class like yours. Before we let you go, just want to let our viewers know what they're seeing on the screen there. These are live photos from Denver, Colorado, and the Aurora campus there, where there appear to be some demonstrations met with police, and arrests are currently underway, is what we're being told. We'll continue to cover this and stay on top of this. Obviously, this is an issue that's impacting campuses across the country, and as we now note, around the world as well. Professor Witold Henisz, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.